everybody. Thank you for joining this episode of HITRUST Secrets. I'm Sue Richards, joined with Donna Nodson, Jeff McHugh. We've got Steve Dufour and Jason Core here today to talk about third-party risk management. Not just to talk about the problem, but to actually hopefully solution some things in a practical, not theoretical type of manner. First, obviously, we need to talk about kind of, where we are and why third-party risk management is so difficult to track and manage, and then hopefully we can get onto some solutions. And we've got a couple other people on the call that obviously feel free to join in whenever and however you want to. This is a very open discussion. So, Steve, Jason, you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah,
Go
you
for it,
first,
sir.
Stephen. All right, I'll
Oh,
go.
yeah.
Jason Core. I have been involved in the world of high trust for about a decade. It's been a long time as an external assessor. I did some cybersecurity strategy consulting for a number of years, a very short stint as a pen tester. And after that, virtual CISO for a couple of years. Came on board here at HITRUST a year and a half ago, thereabout, mostly to focus on research and development for our new AI security offering, or now not so new AI security offering. And most recently have taken a role where I get to work with the market and talk to the folks that rely upon or read the results of high trust assessment reports, and really get to engage and make sure that we're serving customers in the way that you would expect, and maintaining the gold standard that's associated with the high trust brand.
Excellent.
And I'm Steve. So I join or try to join every week. Previously, I was at a couple startups, 3M, like the Post-it note company. I worked in their infrastructure department through an acquisition. That was a lot of fun. Then, then worked at Apple, and then in Bold Health, Quantum Health, and I am currently looking for another role, but I'm also an advisor to a handful of other companies. So,
I
um,
don't know if you can consider 3M and Apple startups, but unless you started with them in like the 1970s, but
yeah, they're definitely a beast of a company.
yeah.
And they tried to test out the waters for kind of like a commercial off-the-shelf software and SaaS by acquiring other companies. And slowly over time, they were like, nah, we don't want to do this. It seems like a lot of headache to make a lot of money. So, um, yeah, and it definitely was a good learning experience because working at 3M and Apple, we're talking about very mature organizations.
Mhm.
And at the same time, you still have to be nimble enough to figure it out as industries and the world change, right? Which kind of like leads into the first question about like third party risk management. Like early on, I guess in business, when you control everything yourself, right? Like we have our own software development teams or like a physical products team, right? Or like at 3M, you have a handful of scientists working on one thing, right? Um, with the globalization of the world throughout various industries as well as connectivity, the internet, right? You can basically outsource any number of either your operations or revenue streams to third parties. Would everybody agree that that was kind of the start?
Yeah, because I mean, I remember back when first started in the IT, I was at Aetna, and Aetna had its own campus with its own data center, and everything was owned and managed and controlled. If they wanted to isolate a computer system, they would just physically walk over to the data center and isolate it. And then I think people always thought, well, cloud hosting is great because now I don't have to worry about capacity. And if I need an extra server, somebody else is taking care of that. But I think that started a whole host of, okay, but now I don't have that control. And to your point, now it's not just the products that you're outsourcing, it's also services, including implementation of those products. Especially in a fractional CISO role or something like that, you're not expected to have all that expertise. You're not even expected to implement in a lot of cases. You just have to find the right people that you trust to do that. And now I think with AI, it's even more so because so many people are going, oh, good, I can use this AI tool to help me with, a treatment plan or a, a quarterly report or something like that. And it's you're so used to having your little bubble of things. And I think I've seen in a lot of healthcare organizations, especially, they're not ready for third-party risk management. There's not a formal program developed for that. It's just kind of an ad hoc part of the procurement process.
Yeah, it kind of feels like third party risk management. I don't want to call it an afterthought, but the decision to outsource so much, for your example was Aetna, but every insurance plan is feeling the same thing, like a overwhelming pressure to improve margins and provide better care for its members in the face of rising premiums. And so they make these business decisions, which are like, we can outsource to somebody who can process claims at scale and realize economies of scale, because now a company like Health Edge or Health Proof, they just merged, it was in the news, or another kind of support organization can process all of the claims for Aetna and United and 20 of the Blues and a bunch of others, and achieve these economies of scale in a way that provides real meaningful savings to the health plans. And of course, the health plans are concerned about keeping their members. And then once we outsource everything, and to Stephen's point with the interconnectivity and digital transformation, and now all of this data is flying all over the globe, and to process these claims or adjudicate or prior auth or whatever the function is, it's all of a sudden like, oh wait, there's a lot of risk here. We're getting notices in the mail that vendors have been breached every week, and it's too late now. We realized that savings, we protected the margins, we protected the patient, but now we've got this incredibly complex threat surface that we've got to go manage. And it was almost by accident that occurred, and now out of necessity, we're trying to grapple with this expanded threat surface and globalized kind of healthcare delivery system, at least in the administrivia of it all.
And I'm going to throw in a non-direct healthcare scenario, because while all of these issues are kind of the more commonplace issues, the major insurance processors and the claims and all of that are part of both treatment and revenue life cycles in the healthcare industry, there are related industries that are using AI at rapidly increasing rates with medical records and bills. And so I'll give you an example. In the legal industry, let's take a look at personal injury cases. So they get all the way through, and there can be anywhere from a few weeks of treatment to months or years worth of treatment from a variety of different medical providers. And they are increasingly turning to AI to speed things up, to say, hey, can you please compare all of these medical records and all of these medical bills and tell me what's missing or inconsistent between these, right? This is massive, absolutely massive, huge amounts of PHI in here. Right? And, there are a lot of new legal tech providers. I have yet to come across one that I'm enamored with the security. I'd say there's a huge opportunity there for expansion of HITRUST. A lot of these folks just don't understand. They'll slap HIPAA, HIPAA aligned. Great, I pay my taxes too. Does that mean I'm IRS aligned? Like, how does that work? And I don't think they really understand what that means. And they don't understand. I mean, I will tell you, I've seen security practices which blatantly don't meet standards. And those are things where I'm guiding my clients, go, no, don't do that. Let's walk over here. But it's concerning that these are very commonplace in the legal industry. And I like I said, I appreciate it's not direct healthcare, but these are medical records, and AI is being used recently, and it's concerning. Anybody else have better experiences or some, happier moments to share that I could maybe pass along?
Yeah, I think that I think the legal industry itself is particularly challenging for a couple of reasons. Like one is like, okay, shameless stereotype here, attorneys are just slower to adopt technology. Like it's just a part of the industry, right? And we in healthcare are 10 years behind financial services. So that's challenge one. Number two is it's largely decentralized. And so the legal industry is unique in that there are just tons of shops where attorneys go out on their own and practice, right? And even amongst the largest firms, you're talking about, maybe 100 partners. It's not like healthcare where you have one payer that's 20% of the total market, right?
Yeah.
Or
Right.
or in healthcare, the largest health system, hundreds and hundreds of hospitals, maybe 10% of the market, right? And so when these big players like that step up and say, hey, my global supply chain is broken and I need to do something about it, like ask for HITRUST, then you see a movement in the market. But kind of the initiation behind that is one very large enterprise with a really complex risk posture that has the kind of market pull and brand recognition to go out and say, we're going to standardize and we think everybody should do this, like HITRUST, which makes legal a little bit challenging. But I think you're right. Like it's a good fit, right? The altruist in me wants, like, this is an important place to go and protect. Like people when attorneys get involved are in like very, I don't want to say precarious. It's like a challenging time in their lives generally, right? Like
Yeah.
if everything was going well, you probably didn't need to go get a lawyer. And I would
Yes.
love to give them additional protections. I heard of one case, and I don't have the name handy in front of me, but a judge recently ruled that there was this case, and the one of the parties in the suit would go and talk to their lawyer, and then they would go home and type it all into ChatGPT and say, like, is this lawyer good? What are they thinking about? And the recent ruling was that that's not client attorney privilege. So when you talk to your lawyer, you can't subpoena the notes from that call, but you can subpoena the notes from ChatGPT and get conversation history out of there, even if it's the same sensitive topic. It's just ChatGPT doesn't happen to be a licensed attorney who is representing you. You know what I mean?
Yep. Absolutely. And that makes it difficult in this day and age for people to sense check things. I mean, a lot of people consider having a conversation with ChatGPT, give or take, like having a conversation with themselves. I'm not saying that's right, but having a conversation with an internal, is this good enough? Can I polish this paragraph up? Can I do something better with it? Right. But it's kind of a private thing. So I find it very interesting. That's an interesting ruling and certainly one to watch. And I think that gives way for how can the structure of AI be used in, I think, more appropriate ways? Because honestly, I do think people should have the right to go home and check something that their lawyer said to them. I'm not saying lawyers are dishonest. I think most lawyers work really hard, but we're scammed so often, left, right, and center. Every person should have the right to go home and sense check something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the great advantages to AI, just as an overall tool to enhance productivity and expand the way we examine problems, is because depending on how your AI is trained and utilized, you have a ton of information available to enhance the knowledge at your fingertips. And I didn't know that, Jason. That's very interesting that those don't fall under. I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't realize those didn't fall under that protected communication and could be subpoenaed. So
That's right.
And I feel like that's going to be a difficult message for attorneys to share too, because so you go to your attorney, they give you advice, and then they say, and you can't go home and put this into ChatGPT to check my homework because that means it's not privileged information.
Right.
And
So
that
then you're going
takes
to hire
all of us
another
out of
lawyer
wonder.
to check up on that lawyer.
it,
And yeah,
it,
what
yeah,
a great self-fulfilling career. Well, and part of it, I think, with lawyers, who are the ones that are making the laws, but legislators are typically have a law background. And even the American Bar Association doesn't have necessarily a lot of tight regulations. They have kind of those general guidelines, almost like, accounting principles, but it's like, well, you should or shouldn't do this, but enforcing it, they're typically policing themselves as opposed to having a regulatory body coming down and making sure that they are following the letter and the spirit of things and that they are giving good advice. There's really not a lot of recourse if you do feel like you can't trust your lawyer,
Mhm.
other than to make a complaint to an organization of more lawyers and
Yeah.
hope that they side with little old you as opposed to, your lawyer with 10, 15 years of experience and a reputation and going to cocktail parties with them. And, so you're kind of like, great. It's almost like trying to fight government, with judges that work for the government. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to win. So I think that's part of it too. But
Yeah.
When it comes to third-party management and risk management, does everybody agree that like AI is up there? Like, is there anybody on the call that
mhm.
would say like that's the number one threat to an organization is third-party
Oh,
usage of AI?
I would just say
And we,
AI. I mean, it doesn't have to be third party. Companies are shooting themselves in the foot on a regular basis where, they don't even consider how their employees internally are using AI in ways that could be discoverable,
mhm.
could 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 be, going outside, especially in like publicly traded organizations, could be going outside ring fence named individuals who are supposed to have that information. And they're plugging it into something which, yes, it's an internal AI system that maybe has some guardrails around the whole company, but does it have guardrails around the folks who are supposed to be part of named groups for privileged information?
Yeah.
I think it's AI in general. Yes, in third parties, also internally.
Yeah, I really like that. Interesting thing. If you have the ChatGPT corporate account, your IT admin can see every prompt that everybody sent in. And so if you have like quarterly financial reports that aren't, widely distributed within the company and the CFO is like, is the formatting right? And then the IT admin can go see it, right? But I don't know that that's like the big concern. I think it is a concern, and I would call that threat vector data leakage.
Mhm.
I think, and we've learned how to deal with that for like a really long time. Like before ChatGPT was around and prompts, like you could use personal Dropbox, personal email, social media. Like there were all of these websites where data might get leaked out just over HTTPS, just over normal internet traffic,
Yeah.
and we've got things like web content filtering, whitelisting IPs. We've got like local endpoint tracking, like the
Mhm.
tools that we have to. I agree, it might be more widespread now, and it might not occur to people that putting things in there is actually leaking data. But like the controls to prevent it are pretty sound. To me, the thing
Mhm.
that I'm worried about is when vendors add AI into existing SaaS apps. So like if you've got a normal productivity app where you go in and there's a Kanban board and like you've used it and it's been through diligence and it's contracted and everything's working great. And then one day you log in and there's like an AI bot in the corner that's like, hey, ask me anything about your internal projects. And you're like, whoa,
I,
like where did that come from and how did that get there? And that's what really scares me because they slipped it in after the fact as a new feature, post due diligence, post contract, and it's not something you asked for and it's not something you signed up for.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
um
Microsoft did it with Copilot,
yeah,
and it was like you
yeah,
were at a security conference and
yeah.
Microsoft going, "Hey, look at this Copilot," and you're like, "Excuse me, was there ever this announced to the security people first before you put it out in the hands of the end users?" Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that, but we're
Oh,
secure.
well,
Okay,
okay,
yeah,
well, I
like
mean,
how do I
ideally,
verify that?
But that
and
implies
ideally the way it works is you go into this and you've got the SaaS app and they hopefully have notified you about it and told you how it works and they've got it set up right, but we just don't know that, right? Like it could be that this model lives in AWS Bedrock and it's like totally escrowed and it's not no back and forth unless like a pretty good use case. I mean, it could be this model could be hosted locally. It might just be API calls to ChatGPT, right? Like if I'm a Series B startup with moderate adoption on some productivity SaaS solution, and I'm like trying to go fast, and the board's like do AI, like the fastest way to market, and there's pressure to be first to market. The fastest way to go to market is just to send an API call straight to ChatGPT, no protections or like limited, corporate account, right? Like just send it, and who knows what happens with it.
Yeah.
And I think
And
that
that's
to
that
me
old
is the
mentality
scariest
of, we'll worry
outcome.
about security when we have a customer, but we
Yeah.
gotta build it to get the
But
customer. And
Yeah.
that's kind of counterintuitive to what we've been trying to teach for years now, is let's build it in from the very beginning. And then it was like, oh, new shiny thing. Let's do it the old way. And you're like, there was a reason why we
that
said don't do that.
the thing is though,
Well,
that
jump
amplifies
in,
the
Dennis.
whole,
Yeah.
sorry, that amplifies the whole third party risk equation though, because like you said, you may pop onto something, you've already done your due diligence on it, and they put a feature in that you weren't expecting, and you can't disable it. And
Mhm.
so part of, and we're starting to see some of this already, where we have organizations who are saying, look, if you're going to do business with us, we want to know how you're utilizing AI. We
Yeah.
want to know before we sign the contract, or if we're in contract renewals,
Right.
because we've seen it in a ton of different things where they're like, oh yeah, here's our new feature. You can't turn it off. It's embedded,
Yeah.
Right.
right?
So
And
So
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 at
for
that point, what do you do with your contract? You say, look, you've added something that we didn't agree to, or do you say this is going to be a conversation for, the next renewal? And what do you do in the, say you just signed a 2-year agreement, and you're in the middle of a contract, and you have to have that feature. You can't move forward without it. And so, to get the wording in early to say, look, these are the things we need to evaluate. We need to understand what you're going to do and how you're going to be able to modify the program within our boundaries. If not, we're not going to do business.
Yeah,
yeah, I think as a
that's a huge point, because like for me, whenever we're talking about just like organizational structures, which include third party risk management, right, as well as others, I think the number one thing missing is the inventories. So like inventory of policies, process, like just go down the list of everything that kind of like makes your company run, including like a list of products, how much the revenue is, like operational process, whatever that happens to be, and then insert where the third parties actually have access or support that particular either revenue process or operational process. And then from there, depending on their level of access or how they're helping you deliver that organizational value, you create that internal process where this particular third party is part of our biggest revenue stream. And if it goes down, we can't deliver. So then you have an initial onboarding SLAs, contractual obligations, which might include clauses in there specific to AI. And then during your annual performance review of that particular vendor, you review to make sure that you know, particular stipulations are met specific to AI, right? And then there needs to be a specific offboarding, right? So let's say that vendor gets replaced by another vendor, right? That particular model and your particular tenant, right? Like, is it, hopefully it's not shared amongst other tenants, right? And it's dedicated to you. But that goes back to Jason's point, which is, like data disclosure portions of it, right? So like some of these core tenets of security where we're trying to stop the bad from happening either revenue or operationally, um, really goes back to the protective mechanisms that we're trying to enforce, right? And so from third parties, like I really feel that the inventory has to happen first. Then, depending on their level of access and structure within your organization, may include extra due diligence steps depending on how they fit into your structures.
So almost like the way we, list the assets, in inventory, the assets, you're kind of listing your vendors and and assigning criticality, to your vendors as well.
And that's why I think it was Donna who said it earlier. In my writings, I don't use the word assets. I use the word dependencies. Because like when we think of an asset, like when like, oh, it's my laptop or it's my server or whatever it happens to be. And typically when we talk about assets, that's more of a financial term because then you have depreciation of assets. It goes into your tax forms, right? Stuff like that. So whenever we talk about an asset in the scope of how we're delivering our corporate strategy, it then becomes a dependency to deliver on this strategy that the organization has set forth, whatever it is. We need depend on these things, right? And so that's why, like in the article I wrote, I classified them in terms
Mhm.
of organizational impact and whether or not it's more of a lift and shift, right? So the independent vendor who provides this laptop down here, can I function as an organization or can I deliver on my strategy if this vendor went away? Let's say Dell got wiped off the map, right? Like, am I going to be able to just go buy a new laptop and just continue as normal, right? And the other ones are more integrated into, well, one's called integrated and the other one's called core. And that's really where the differentiation happens, where the independent vendor, you'll just go to the Apple store and buy a laptop, right?
Right.
Then you configure it afterwards. And like if something happens, unless it's blatantly awful, like it's like gross negligence, then they can't really be held accountable. One of the stories I thought of was, remember grandma went through the McDonald's drive-through or something like that, and McDonald's was held liable.
Mhm.
Like so typically, like I will hand you the coffee and then that's about it, right? So like I will hand you this laptop, I will hand you this coffee,
Mhm.
or I'll sell you this donut. And like we just kind of like go our separate ways. You don't even need a receipt. You just kind of like go about your business. And so the independent vendors, unless they're something blatantly wrong, like a poisoning or like there's a blatant flaw in the operating system or hardware, you just lift and shift to a new one if need be. It's the integrated and core vendors where the core vendors are those MSPs, right? Like you have a specific contractual obligation of you will help me build this particular software system, right? And
Mhm.
you are in charge of that, right? And the integrated one, which I think is probably one of the more common ones now, is like a cloud vendor, right? We provide these services. Yeah, you can kind of like structure some of your SLAs and stuff like that, but we will provide this service to you as well as others. And there are going to be some like carve outs, right? So like we see this in Azure, where they do sign a BAA, but it's only for specific services, right? So there
Mhm.
are some customizations that can happen, but it's also a shared responsibility model.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm showing that kind of that article that you had created about independent, integrated, and core. And I'm wondering, because I mean, to me, it almost kind of looks like we go back to some of the processes that we already have in place. It's just a matter of adding maybe vendor risk to those core processes, like your risk management. Because I mean, when you're talking about this, you're looking at the impact, and the impact is going to be a lot bigger on a core or integrated process than an independent vendor. And also, I think looking at data flow diagrams, I mean, we always go back to that as a very beginning. Okay, where does your data live? And I think that helps you figure out how to categorize all of the vendors that you've got.
Yeah, I like
So,
that. The data flow is really we I think we as an industry have a tendency to do this, and I don't know if it's just because with a focus on healthcare, we're so used to tracking PHI and following it along the data flow and protecting it from disclosure, which is like really good, right? Like we want to do that. But we're protecting against a confidentiality lapse or a breach of what should be regulated or protected information. And I think one of the things that we as a market are working on, exemplified by Change Healthcare, is that tracking the data is good when you're trying to prevent a confidentiality issue, but not necessarily an availability issue. Like you could take out a company's services without ever seeing or disclosing the PHI. And I think Change Healthcare is a good example of that. So although I think mapping the data flow is really, really powerful and really strong, and we all need to be doing it, I think there's a larger conversation around what dependencies exist for maintaining that data flow, even if those dependencies don't ever get a hold of the PHI.
Yeah, I mean that could be. I mean, just look at the rise of like GitHub and those open source repositories, right? So like if your data, just think about your simplest data flow. It comes in, it gets processed, it gets presented to your end user, right? So like your engineering teams, they're out there hitting up GitHub, downloading things, and when they do, like a yum install from a GitHub repository, it's also looking at things it needs to install and run. So that creates this other layer. And so, when you're installing those open source packages, it will say install prerequisite dependencies. say yes, right? And
Yeah.
it installs all of this stuff. So like it's very interesting how the speed in which we need to deliver organizational value has really created this uh, Don, and so your point earlier is this interconnectivity in the world, right?
Yeah.
Where the entire world needs to deliver faster. So then we just opened up like, oh, I'm going to offer this service, and then everybody in the world's going to be dependent on it. AWS, GitHub, Microsoft Azure, GCP are like huge examples where if one of those things went down for any number of time, like it affects the world. And some of my examples were like AWS goes down, nobody can book a flight.
Right.
Hmm.
Well, you're getting at one of the things that I've been grappling with for a while, and in my I don't have the like language to describe this that well. In my head, it's the difference between vendor risk management and software supply chain risk management. Like if your vendor goes down, that sucks. It's easy to do due diligence. You have a contract that's gone through procurement. But there's this whole other thing. It's and anytime you get pull anything, the first file is requirements.txt and it's long, right? Like especially in some of these enterprise solutions, you're pulling in thousands of packages, maybe written open source by developers all over the world. Like, who knows where those came from, right? And I think that's kind of a different concern altogether. One, there's the idea that any of these packages might have a malicious payload, and this has happened from time to time. There's some really good YouTube
Yeah,
videos
yeah,
of.
yeah. There's one right now. I think it was like Light LLM or something like that on GitHub.
Mhm.
Got breach, for lack of a better word, where it's now stealing credentials, right? Everybody's saying like
Of course,
uninstall this. It's stealing all the credentials, right?
of
And
course.
nobody caught it, right? And
Well,
so
and you can't, you just, people just don't do due diligence on all of these packages. It's not like we have a pre-approved library of like, yeah, you're allowed to use Python, or if you've got Python, you're allowed to use, pandas or PyCharm or whatever other of the hundreds of thousands of packages that
PyPy,
are out there
yeah.
and are necessary to be able to
Hmm.
build the type of software we need today. And like, I think that in addition to that, like if those services go down, if GitHub goes down, this is a perfect example of this disclosure versus availability situation. If GitHub goes down and nobody has access to their repos across the globe, you're going to see software starting to fail. Even
Hmm.
if that software, the PHI never went back to GitHub, by GitHub going down, now you've lost your ability to push new code to prod, depending on your deployment, but almost certainly. And if not, your like ability to actual push, like a DevOps push pull requests, like you've at least lost your ability to collaborate with your other developers, right? And that alone should be able to take out like a lot of
And
this complex software.
I think that goes back to the inventories portion of it, where like you have an inventory of organizational value and how you deliver that. And that might like we're all in business, right? So like the organizational value has a dollar sign attached to it, but your mission of your company, whatever it happens to be, might be to deliver healthcare services, right? And so if your package isn't available and therefore like your SaaS app isn't available and you can't check people in, or that doctor who is about to go into surgery is reviewing that digital chart on the iPad before going into surgery and basically says, I can't access the file, so I don't really know their history. I needed a refresher, and that it's a denial of care, right? And
Yeah.
so going back, it might be a denial of the organizational value that you promised your clients to deliver,
Is it the money at risk or the mission? I
right?
think in business you got to say both if you want to get
Hmm.
anything done. Yeah, there's some really interesting solutions out there right now. Epic and Cerner come to mind. Cerner's now Oracle Health, and they've got like the most insane like business continuity outage practices, and not insane in a bad way. I mean like hyperbolically complex, where they take the medical records and they cache them real time to this like on-site appliance with backup power, and then, like, in the event that the internet goes out or the production EMR goes down, these crash carts boot up and they have everybody's record, not for the last 10 years, but certainly for the last couple of days. And then you work on that system and it doesn't need electricity and every cart's got like a battery on it and it works. And then it like fails back over. Right. And
Yeah.
so I say all of this to say that like these aren't new or different issues that we're struggling with here. Like a lot of companies have put a lot of thought into this, but the takeaway is it isn't easy, and you do need to think about it. And generally, it's pretty expensive. That's
Yeah. But
a pretty hefty add-on to the standard
yeah,
EMR.
but I would say, that's where security can be turned into a strategic advantage. And I don't think there's enough of that because there have been hospitals and emergency rooms, surgeries that have had to shut down in the past few years because they had systems that got held for ransom or breached on some level and were fundamentally unavailable. And they had to shut down because while they could have gone back to some pen and paper for certain types of medical needs, what they didn't have is what medications is this person on? What is their health history? What are all of their other risks that we're expected and responsible for knowing, though we don't have access to? None of it. We have access to nothing. And those are the types of things that haven't yet quite been prevented, even with that amazing scenario that you just painted, where they've got everything in the past couple of days. Is that sufficient to run an emergency room, and for how long?
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference between like a health system that's running with positive margins and maybe makes a couple percentage on the revenue they bring in, like 1 or 2%. It's slim. It's like grocery store margins, like
Yes,
tiny.
yes, absolutely.
And like the rural hospital that's trying to keep up, that maybe can't go invest in all of these things, which it's tough, right? Like we hate to see hospitals closing. Clearly they are because of consolidation in the market. I mean, you could just see the pressure that's on these hospitals to keep going.
But can we talk about the money that they're spending on non-essential things like questionnaires? The billions that they're still spending on questionnaires while shutting down hospital wards, questionnaires which have no chance at actually improving their security posture on any level. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, so there's this kind of like, I agree with you. Two, that I think it's interesting. Questionnaires to me get like an interesting rap because sometimes I don't know if they're doing this. Like, we send this questionnaire, is it because we want to understand the risk posture and manage it? Or is it because in the event that something goes wrong, we want to point to it and say, look, they lied to us? Like, does anybody respond no on a questionnaire? I've seen hundreds. I've never seen one fail. Right. And
So
so,
yeah, for the failing portion, no, but to your point just a second ago, and we talked about this previously, where it's not necessarily, I don't know a better term for it other than a gotcha. It's more like a gotcha, as in, you said no to this, we need to have a discussion, right? So like, it does one point in time, here's this thing. Sure, you have a SOC 2 or a high trust thing, and at the same time, because you answered this way, which may or may not contradict the certification or the attestation, let's further have that discussion so we can see how you're going to fit into our value chain.
oh, that's similar, but my point is this: like, I don't know that the primary value in a questionnaire is understanding an accurate representation of the risk posture of the vendor. Like,
Correct.
and Stephen, you would know this because of your role as a CISO. In my head, it's an insurance policy. It's finger pointing in the event that something goes wrong. So if a vendor lies and says, I have multi-factor authentication, and then there's a breach related to authentication, you say, look, you misrepresented your services to me. I got you writing it down in this questionnaire, which we knew you were going to answer everything yes, so you could get through procurement, which is just like the most broken and ineffective, and I think disrespectful to the patients and the people we're all here to serve, right? Way to go about it. But like, and I don't know many CISOs that are going to raise their hand and be like, yeah, I do this as a gotcha. Yeah, I do this in case something bad happens. I can blame somebody else. But like,
who actually fills out the questionnaires?
Right.
It is nary a CISO, I'll tell you that.
It
is not a CISO, it's not a CIO. You'd be lucky to think it was some sort of a manager or director in technology. I can tell you with confidence, it is a lower paid employee who is taking information, possibly from a spreadsheet or some data source that they're supposed to store things in, so that the people who know the information don't have to answer the questionnaires and don't have to be bothered with these questions on a regular basis. And that person turns around and says, where can I match this information on the questionnaire?
And that person is probably incented to go as fast as possible and answer as many
You got it.
questions in the
The sales
affirmative as
team is
possible.
like,
That's right.
this needs to get
That's
out.
right.
100%.
Well, and I think that's what we're here for, and I think that's really what HITRUST exists to solve. And I do appreciate everyone on this call for helping us get the message out there, because yeah, it's broken. I mean, I talked to quite a few payers in the last few months, and the data on this is alarming. The average questionnaire takes 20 to 60 hours to complete. I mean, think about that. That's 50 vendors for an entire FTE, and we're talking about health systems, a small health system, as even just one hospital. Think 30-bed hospital. It's going to have 5,000 vendors or more, right? Like now, maybe a small percent of them are going to go get be evaluated through the vendor risk management process, but you're still talking about entire teams of people that are invested in this idea of a questionnaire because they don't know the alternatives, or they don't feel empowered to demand HITRUST, or they don't understand kind of the details of HITRUST or other audits and attestations and certifications, right? But like, our idea is that if we enable them, we make that 40 hours go away, right? And the health system or the payer loves to hear it, because here we are talking about low margins in an environment where it's very difficult to make money. And you say, well, here's something that'll improve your risk posture, and it's free. Ask for HITRUST, right? Like, asking your vendor for HITRUST costs no money to the health system or the payer, and it has a measurable real return. Like, we can calculate, and we do in our trust report. Anyone who wants it, we'll send you last year's if you haven't seen it. The next one's coming out, I think, in a week or 2 weeks here. And we can calculate the material reduction in risk associated with asking for a HITRUST report. And the headline stat is it's less than 1% breach rate for a HITRUST certified system, right?
And are you guys tracking the difference between some of the, let's say, larger corporations versus some of the smaller ones? Let's say corporations, it could be like hospital systems, health systems, whatever it happens to be. The difference between urban and rural, and those opportunities there, because whenever we're talking about some just like small practice or a smaller hospital, like they may have access to like state funds or something like that, but like they're a small team, right? Maybe family owned, everybody knows one another. Is there any opportunity there?
I think that would be very challenging. I'd love to work with you on it. Here are some of the things that get in the way. One is, like, HITRUST is really built for large enterprises like health systems and insurance plans, but it's built not, hey, let me go audit myself and give this report to my board. It's built such that insurance plans and health systems can say, hey, vendor supply chain, like, you've exposed me to a lot of risk. Prove to me that you're secure and that your services, that you're managing the risk that I, the health system, who's accountable to OCR, HHS, my patients, I bear that risk. So here, you go do this audit, and you bear the cost of compliance, and you demonstrate that you're doing the right things and provide that report to me. That's kind of what HITRUST is built to do. And so, because of the nature of it, it's not the covered entities, the insurance plans and the health systems that have high adoption. Now, there are a lot that do it because it is a best practice and we know it works, and they're generally the well-funded institutions that go out and do that. But the vast majority of adoption is among what we call business associates: population health, digital health, telehealth, revenue cycle management, clinical systems, radiology, that kind of thing. And because of that, our data on the payers and providers is we got really good data on when there are negative security outcomes related to contracts with their vendors, not necessarily directly affected. Now, we probably have a big enough sample, or we certainly do have a big enough sample to make some meaningful insights. But I wouldn't say that it's like enough that it's really high quality research, right? Because there just aren't enough. Now, the interesting thing is, in that business associate population, we got really, really good data, right? And we can track based on the performance in a HITRUST assessment, the likelihood that they report a breach, right? And when they do report these breaches, they usually go to the covered entity, into OCR, and we see it on the OCR wall. And they also have contractual obligations to report those things to us if the breach occurred within the in-scope system. And so now what we can do is we can correlate, we can run a regression and see, based on how a company did on any particular domain or category or control family or requirement statement or a value development, based on any factor within that assessment, what is the likelihood that they were compromised down the road? And the results are incredibly powerful, right? Less than 1%. And by the way, that number, it addresses both the R2 and the I1 assessment. So the I1 is only 180-ish requirement statements. And the R2 can be, 250 to usually 300 or more, up to 1,000 plus requirement statements. And what we find is, like, generally they are equally as effective. They are both preventing breaches at a very, very high rate. At least when you baseline it to what we believe the standard. The E1's a little bit different, but I think there's some sample bias because it's so generally the companies or the systems that pursue an E1 assessment are like pretty simple. They're reduced threat surface, right? Like the big enterprise with the on-prem data center is more likely to get popped just because it's bigger, it's easier to get in. That's also the one that's doing the R2. Born in the cloud, probably doing an E1. Or at least more likely to do.
Wait, no, hold on. Did you say born in the cloud E1? Is that what
I said if a company is born in the cloud, it is more likely to do an E1 relative to another company. Now, I'm not saying that E1 is the right answer just because you're born in the cloud, right? But I am saying that there might be some sample bias when we say, oh, the breach rate for an E1 or an R2 are different from each other. Well, the simpler systems generally got the E1, and because they're simpler, they have a lower breach rate. So then it's like, is the E1 mitigating risk better than the R2? We don't really know because we don't have that good of a baseline. And that's like the other thing I wanted to talk about here is, like, we say 1% breach rate, but what are you baselining against? There's no data, at least no good data that I've seen, on how likely any given company is to go have a breach, right?
But I would call out the general breach rate across industry and sectors, which are wildly higher than 1%.
Yeah, no, absolutely the case.
15,
if you look
20,
at the
30,
Verizon
40.
Yeah, you look at the Verizon report every year, and it's easily double digits every time. And the other piece of that, when we're looking at third parties, is we've seen a huge increase in the attack structure of where the cyber criminals are going to get that. And so that's one of the things that we looked at was they're going after third parties because in a lot of cases, as we've already discussed, that a lot of times there's not as strict of control in those environments because they're a supporting system, and in some cases, right or wrong, they're not evaluated as important as the primary system with the big dollars behind it. But they're doing the same thing that we do in business, which is they're looking ROI. They're looking at where's the easiest way to attack these things and where's the best way to get results from your money, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I like that idea. I think I don't know too many advanced persistent threat actors, if you will. I don't have friends that go out and pop these systems for a job or anything, but in the people that I've spoke with who are familiar with this, it's generally opportunistic, right? Like if you're a hacker, you're going to get in wherever you can get in, and you happen to get into the ones with poorer or weaker controls. And then once you're in it, a revenue cycle management company, you extract the data that belongs to the big guy, or you use that as a stepping stone and you move laterally into the big guy's environment. And it wasn't like this drawn out strategy where it's like, I'm going to attack the biggest health system in America, show me their list of vendors and let's try to get in it. It was like, let's go out to the open internet and like figure out where we can get in. Let me buy credentials like on the dark web. Let me do open scans and see if I can find anything online. Like, let me see whose computer I can pick up or take their credentials, or where there are, 0-day vulnerabilities that are exposed that I can exploit. And then once they're in, it's like, okay, we're in. What can we do with that access? And it just so happens that like the most value is when that type of compromise of a system leads to a compromise of an even bigger system, right? It's not that we planned to get the health system by popping the vendors. It's that we pop the people we can pop or hack, and then move laterally into the health system environment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. I didn't mean they were going after the health system through the vendors, but because the vendors are generally less protected, that's their entry point, and then they're transitioning over into the other systems where they see an opportunity.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily know that it's not them targeting major health systems, because when you talk to some of the tech folks, once they're familiar with, navigating, development and engineering within a controlled environment in health tech, for example, they tend to stay in the health tech family. So you get engineers that are leaving one company and going to another, and they take all of the inside knowledge on what it means and how weak that other organization is with them.
Yeah.
And they're not going from hospitals, mind you. They're going from BAA. So BAs. So they're going from the, one health tech vendor to another health tech vendor. And that's where, yes, you can get somebody who's really good and can tell you probably all the ins and outs
Yeah.
and who's sweeping what under the rug.
Mhm.
But, it's very, dare I go as far as nepotistic.
Yeah, the thing about that system that really scares me is that like a lot of the times the ransomware gangs, the ones that are big at least or in the news, they don't go hack credentials. They put an ad out there that's like, hey, we're gonna do ransomware, give us good passwords and we'll give you half the money. And then this is why insider threat is so important, because anytime somebody goes from one system, one company to another, and maybe has some credentials or inside intel at the old company, it's like, oh, well, here, I can put the competition down if I have equity interest in the new firm, and I can make money, and I'm not the one doing hacking, right? Like I just have this password and I gave it to someone and they're going to send me half a Bitcoin for it. You know what I mean? That to me is particularly scary.
It is. And that has to do with, how quickly the basic things like offboarding are done. Are they disconnecting those credentials? Are they changing, I don't even want to get into shared credential things where I see passwords that are not changed on a regular, those are
Right.
the types of things that they don't think it's a big risk until it clearly is.
That's right.
Hey, before we run out of time,
Yeah.
I'm going back to my article, and I wanted to pick Jason's brain. You're at a conference, standing at the HITRUST booth, whether or not you represent HITRUST or not. Somebody comes up to you and says, I need to evaluate my vendors. I don't want to hear they should have a HITRUST certification. What should I ask my vendors for? Like, what should I be doing to help evaluate my vendors? Like, what's that question they should ask?
I think there's like a mature way to approach this and a less mature. And the less mature is they should have a HITRUST cert. Like obviously we want that. We're HITRUST. We believe in the product. If we didn't think it was good, like none of us would work here, right? But it is. The mature way to approach that process is really it depends on the company and the company's individual risk tolerance, their business model, and what we call the inherent risk associated with the vendors. And so what I would like to do with that particular company is like learn a little bit more about how it works and what their mission is and what they outsource. And for those things that are outsourced, like is there regulatory pressure or a threat to the business continuity or the resiliency of the business? And then once we understand those risks, and that's always step one, right? Like you can't sell HITRUST as a way to fix risk unless you understand what those risks are. Much like you can't protect, you mentioned earlier, the assets or the dependencies you have unless you know what those dependencies are. So let's go figure out what the dependency vendors are, the risk that they present to the business, and then let's make a decision on what are we going to do here. And there's a number of things that we can do. Like the worst is blind trust, right? Maybe it's the worst, maybe it's not the worst. I don't know. It's up to the company to decide, but I don't know that many people are like meeting their obligations to protect the business or the shareholders or their own personal values by saying we're going to do blind trust with a vendor. Then one step up from there is like maybe some contractual obligations, indemnification, like who's liable in the event of an accident. Let's put some like controls in the contract and say you're going to have passwords and you're going to use encryption and like put that thing in the contract, but let's not audit it. Let's not attest to it. Like you're just going to say you're going to do this. And then your recourse is if something goes wrong, you go back and point at that contract, right? And then you've got a questionnaire, and then you've got I'd call it a direct audit. There are other words for this, like large companies, especially in the insurance space, will do these audits or assessments of their vendors. Like sometimes they even go on site.
Surprise.
Then a step up from there, I'd say there are like what I'd call like mid-quality audits. I'm not going to get into the SOC 2 and the Delve thing right now and many of the other automation firms, but like we'll say like a SOC 2 from a reputable firm, maybe a top 100 firm. I put a lot of faith in, like if the audit firm has something to lose, you can count on that report, right? And then ISO 27001, if it comes from like an ANAB accredited, ANAB is the accreditation body. There are others, but ANAB is known to be a little bit more rigorous. And then like maybe at the top, and I'd say this, obviously I work at HITRUST, is the top is the I1 or R2 HITRUST assessment report. And then the question to the vendor is like, okay, or the relying party in this case is like, okay, well, you know what the risks are, you know what the options are to treat it. Let's try to come up with some measurement, a dollar value of your loss expectancy if they're doing nothing, a dollar value of your loss expectancy if they're doing something, and you have this quantitative analysis, right? Like you wouldn't ask your cleaning company to go get an R2, right? Like that doesn't usually make sense. But if you're giving every patient record that you have as a health system to a revenue cycle company so they can send the bills, like you probably want to ask them to do an R2. And then the sale is like, why HITRUST over SOC 2 or others? And I think it just comes down to measurement, right? Like we know 1% breach rate and we can't baseline it against SOC 2. And it's structurally impossible to measure security outcomes as they relate to SOC 2 performance. 1, because the controls are different. 2, because a different firm audits it every time. And 3, because there's no centralized reporting, right? Like in HITRUST, everybody tells HITRUST how they did in the assessment, and we can baseline it over time. In SOC 2, your auditor issues the report, and there's really no follow-up.
And it's almost like what we talked about at the beginning with because there's all these different accountants and accounting firms doing those SOC 2s, and there's no one overall governing body, which I think I kind of heard with, ANAB with an ISO 27001, because it's a governing body that's overseeing that. And, there's less of that rigor in a SOC 2 environment. And I think a SOC 2 was more made for a financial company and not necessarily a healthcare company. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the first thing is to have a conversation with whoever that vendor is and just kind of get their thoughts behind how seriously are they taking security measures, security controls. Because you can tell pretty easily if they're like, a what? And if you're asking about password management or access management and they're like, yeah, whatever. You're like, okay, well, they're going to be ones that are those independent. If they die tomorrow, I can pick up somebody else, and move on with my business. But if they're intrinsic to your business and getting things done and the impact to you is huge, then at that point you're like, I want to talk through that maturity level and that focus or perspective they have on information security.
Yeah. Actually, I think of it like a little bit differently. I think you start with a standard, a bar, right? Like anyone who has PHI is going to do at least an I1. Anyone who has PHI is going to give me an independent audit of some sort that was not filled out by themselves, right? It's start with the bar. And then when you have that conversation, be like, do you need an exception? How are we going to navigate this? Why don't you have this? This is a best practice. Everybody else has this. Will you go get this for me, right? These are conversations that you can have after the fact. But you kind of have to start with that organizational standard, organizational commitment to protecting the patients, in my head at least.
But how does that then apply to other scenarios where PHI is involved and everybody knows it's involved and there's no vendor that has HITRUST even offering the types of functionality? And I'm going to go back to my legal industry because those are, their communications to and from providers with personal injury law firms. That is by and large how those records are transmitted. And that's across the nation. And there are, let me tell you, I have banged down the street trying to find vendors with any sort of strong security posture. Nobody's heard of HITRUST. Nope, that's not true. I talked to one. I will call out Super Panel for the fact that they have stronger security and they're working towards HITRUST. I had talked to them and I was very excited that they'd heard of HITRUST and were looking at an E1. Yeah. But they're a rarity. They stuck out of my head because it's so rare.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think it depends a little bit on the market, right? Like in the cases where the risk is so substantial that you need something like that, I think HITRUST has pretty good market penetration. Like you're going to find a telehealth provider who has HITRUST. You're going to find a population health provider who has HITRUST, if that's what you're looking for, revenue cycle management. Like if you say we need HITRUST, you can find one who has it. They might be more expensive. They might not be. I'm not entirely sure. Now, when you get outside of those very high risk healthcare environments, or even healthcare environments with like kind of lower risk service offerings or vendors, like it might be harder to find somebody with a HITRUST certification. You're absolutely right. But at the end of the day, and I know you're talking about legal, but at least within health systems and providers, it is that company's obligation to protect the patient. Like that's what a business associate agreement is. That's how HIPAA works. And if the health system says you got to go get HITRUST, like if they make that decision to protect their patients and protect their company and protect the stakeholders and keep the employees employed and like benefit the vulnerable communities that they serve, like if they make that decision and stick to it, I think it's one that's generally adopted. And the growing number of HITRUST subscribers is certainly a testament to that. Now, legal might be a little bit different. It might be lower risk, right? Instead of giving 10,000 patient records to a billing company, we give like 3 cases to a legal software like Clio, right? Like the risk there isn't as outsized and it doesn't have the same regulatory oversight that healthcare has. And so it might be a little bit harder to get adoption, but I would watch for at least HITRUST to move outside of the healthcare space. Like this is our bread and butter. This is where we found product market fit. People know us in healthcare, but I mean, higher education faces a lot of the same issues, and a lot of times works
less than 1% breach rate means other industries should be clamoring for this.
That's right. That's right. Higher education and financial services are top of my list, but I mean, retail, manufacturing, critical infrastructure, government, you name it.
Last question for you. Is there anything this year that you're like super pumped about as far as HITRUST third-party risk management goes? Anything that you can disclose? Use that term very.
I've got some secrets, even on HITRUST secrets I can't tell you about, but the company is really got a great direction right now. I would watch for the trust report next week. That's the highlight of my year professionally every year. Like I love reading it. It's got amazing deep insights. And we're just so proud of the way that our framework effectively mitigates risk and that we can measure it. So I'd watch for that. I'd watch for some software changes toward the end of the year. Watch for our go-to-market pattern and the way that we engage with our partners and our assessors and our valuable subscribers and the customer that really my passion is with and that I'm here to serve, which is the person that reads the report. And if we consider all of that and the full power of our research and development group and our technology teams and our threat intelligence and everything we're doing every day, I'd say the trust report's gonna tell the whole story that it's working. And we're not done yet. I mean, there's a lot of work to do. There are a lot more companies that haven't done HITRUST. There are a lot of companies that have huge risk in their supply chain and they just don't know to ask for HITRUST yet. So that's who we're here to help, and that's what we're going to do.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This has been very, very helpful. And next week, in addition to the HITRUST report, we're also really looking forward to having Ida Waninki from HITRUST QA to come in and answer all questions about HITRUST QA, how to make her life easier and how to in turn make our lives as assessors and readiness assessors easier. And we'll weasel all the other stuff out of the Chief Revenue Officer when we get him on later on in the spring. So we'll have him tell us all the deep, dark secrets.
Susan, I'll be joining Ida for that session.
Oh, perfect. Well, good. We'll look forward to seeing you.
I think she's got enough period that I can join for that session. So
good. Okay.
I may be more than just a silent square next week.
Perfect. Well, we appreciate it.
We can usually, get some secrets out of the sales guys. So
exactly. That's what I figured. I get the revenue officer to tell us.
I'm technically not a sales guy. I could bring one on. I mean, if you want, we'll find one of them and I don't know.
Thanks to everyone.
Well, thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody.
We'll talk soon.